Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Auron MacIntyre, who is an author and internet denizen. He just recently published a book called The Total State, which compiles his research into the current problem with the American managerial class, or the deep state. And there's various different ways to talk about this, to think about this, from the conspiratorial to the critical, and Auron falls decidedly on the critical side of that particular coin. In this conversation, we talk about elite theory, or the Machiavellian analysis of power, and how he has applied that. That is, how Auron has applied that to American politics in the current day, and what he foresees as the solutions to this increasingly disconnected and yet increasingly encroaching power structure of the United States government. You can find his book via the link below, as well as links to his work on The Blaze, and as well on Twitter, which he's always producing quite delicious zingers for all to behold. Without further ado, here is Auron MacIntyre.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
How's it going, man?
Good. How you doing?
Pretty good. What's happening?
Not much, just a book coming out. So
Right now, right? It's like releasing as we speak.
The sprint has begun.
It's-
Just a large number of interviews back to back to back.
Okay, yeah. Well, we can hit the ground running then.
Yep, absolutely, man.
You're just you're the man. What was the finish like for you? Like the final month of doing it? Did you work closely with an editor, or did you have it mostly on your shoulders?
The initial edits were done by a friend of mine, Stephen Carson. He's got his own YouTube channel, and he is a good copy editor, and so he smoothed a lot of it out before it went to the major editor, like the actual publisher.
Yeah.
So most of the grammatical stuff and whatever was done, but it was just getting in there and adding content and filling in some stuff was the main.
What was the overall structure for it? Did you do like a seven rules for life kind of thing or something like that?
No, I mean, it was basically, I kind of fell together because I was just doing the video essays explaining kind of the political theory. And over time, I was like, oh, actually, this kind of forms a narrative. This actually, there's a through line here of like how this fits together.
Okay.
And so really, I just ended up kind of ordering my video essays and fleshing them out and giving them connective tissue. And that kind of turned that into an overall book.
By narrative, do you mean like an arc of some sort, like of development or historical process?
Yeah, I mean, it's the book traces basically the development of the centralization and expansion of government power, and also the rise of the managerial elite and bureaucratic structures in modernity. And so, just as I was evaluating all those separate topics, I was like, oh no, if you put these in the right order, there's actually a story of how this happened and why it happened.
Yeah. Is there like a central insight that you're trying to get across, or is it kind of more of a primer, I guess?
I a little bit of both. I mean, I'm hitting on a bunch of thinkers that I think are important that people need to like have a basic understanding of and knowledge of. But it also, like I said, kind of it has a through line of there's a certain limit to human organization. There are certain hard limits that we hit as we expand, and that's going to have a certain impact on societies. And we have largely ignored the question of scale when it comes to the application of political systems. We're just kind of like, yeah, you have a democracy or you have whatever, and it just always maps on to a civilization, whether it's 10 people or 350 million. And that's actually not the case at all. And the more we try to scale up the more we try to scale up civilization, the more we're finding that those actual applications of political structures don't work. They can't work. And so if we want a particular type of political structure, we actually have to create the societies that it works for, or we need to change our structures. We can't just ignore these limitations and expect to get the same result.
Do you compare and contrast other major civilizations like the Islamic State, and its various permutations, or the Roman Empire, the Caliphate, these various different other manifestations of large scale national or supranational structures?
I certainly look at the different. I certainly look at the Roman Empire and others that have had kind of this cycle of civilization, applied to them. I didn't go deeply into non-Western frames, though. I guess even inside the Western frame, there are many different ways that politics has been ordered. But really, the problem with applying that to like the Islamic understanding is that is the Islamic understanding never really went through modernity. So to this day, the nation state is still a relatively like abstract thing for kind of the Muslim understanding of ordering society. Things either are tribal or they're basically theocratic. There's no in between. Like it's either greater Islam or kind of your local your local tribe. That they're so that's why it was so easy for the British, for instance, to kind of carve up Islamic empires and put them in very weird nation states, because the very idea of a nation state just didn't make a lot of sense to these kind of Islamic empires as they came apart.
Why would it make sense to the West or us?
Because we were more comfortable with the abstraction of kind of contractual civilization, in a way that was not as familiar, I think, to many other peoples. It's that's one of the main problems we have, is the general application of a very particular Anglo contractual understanding of society and trying to like universalize it onto every human being across the globe. And we keep finding out that actually you can't put all the square pegs in the round holes. And then we just scream that that's racism or something, and we don't actually take the time to think about why that doesn't.
Yeah. But who's the square peg in the liberal order?
Most other civilizations. The liberalism is a very particular way of being. I think Carl Benjamin makes a good point about this, even though he's kind of pointed out that liberalism has a lot of problems. He's like, well, liberalism probably works for British people, like the people who brought it together, who thought it up, and kind of this probably applies into their society. But you can't just go around and turn every single civilization into kind of a liberal democracy. It doesn't actually work, and we see this repeatedly when we try to do it. It's propped up by foreign powers and international organizations and these kind of things. But the minute that that thumb is taken off the scale, it just kind of collapses back into the natural way that they organize themselves.
Yeah. So I guess I'm trying to find footing to go forward with you. Once we start to analyze power or analyze the deep state or the bureaucratic managerial elite, and kind of see that there's all this fiction going on, but we still live in a country. We still live in America. We still want to live in America, I assume. What do we end up hanging our coats on when we try to think of ourselves as America? And what's the alternative? Are you proposing an alternative, or is it like a kind of taking the coat off of the peg of a United States and going down a rung or two, or even higher to a theocratic understanding?
I think that what we need to remember is that the Constitution, like the purpose of the Constitution, was not to create like a universal system of governance. It was not some kind of advancement in political technology that solves a large amount of political problems and kind of keeps your government small and your people free in perpetuity. It's simply an instantiation of the way of being of the people who wrote the Constitution, as all constitutions are. And so therefore, returning to the Constitution, returning to the United States as such, is very difficult, because we're not the people of the 1790s, and we're not the 13 colonies of the 1790s.
Yeah.
And most people who talk about how we have to get back to the founding fathers' vision would be horrified if we actually got back to the founding fathers' vision. Like, find me 10 conservative congressmen who are interested in limiting the franchise. Right? Sorry, but there was not a universal franchise in the 1790s, nor was there intended to be. The founding fathers were very clear about this. So like the idea that we're going back to any of that is just not happening. And so we have to ask ourselves, like, okay, so what is, who are we now? And what do we want to be now? And I think that requires a good deal of probably localism in a way that is currently unimaginable for a lot of people. I don't think you can keep an open border and maintain a global empire and then kind of reevaluate who you are simultaneously. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know how you continually have a massive influx of people, a shifting population, a swelling and shifting culture that then like draws itself together and rediscovers its identity and its founding principles. That's hard enough for smaller smaller government smaller governments, smaller countries that have a clear idea of who they are. I don't even know if it's possible at the
Yeah.
current scale and that we're trying to operate. But really, the most important thing for most people is just keeping the system going. And so that's the kind of their primary driver. And so I think that if we're actually going to have a moment of like self-reflection that would allow us to do this, at the very least, we need to be able to stop the influx and scale down the way that we're understanding how government should be applied.
Hmm.
But again, I don't think there's a lot of incentive in our current government structure to do any of those things.
Where will that incentive arise?
Probably when things stop working when we hit a pretty solid wall. I
Yeah.
mean, we're already getting to the point where we're seeing competency, fall apart. We're seeing the idea that you kind of have this unipolar, hegemonic empire that's going to that's just infallible, can't lose anything. That the dollar will just be the reserve currency of the world in perpetuity. Like these things are starting to fall apart. These myths are starting to come apart. And they're the key things that are allowing us to kind of expand without any real consequence up to this point. But that simply can't go on forever. And we're already starting to see people self-sort. We're seeing that the social and political divisions inside the country are too severe to be settled by kind of just a marketplace of ideas scenario. And so people have to move in with their feet, and they have to gather around people who actually share their values and share their understanding of what the country should be. And when they do that, you all start to see governors test the water of like,
Yeah.
well, maybe we don't have to do some of the things the federal government tells us to do. I mean, the left have been doing it forever, right? Sanctuary cities, whatever. We'll just ignore federal law. We don't care. And so now you start to see some of the governors on the right,
Yeah.
test some of that with like, well, maybe we can enforce the border. Like
Yeah.
maybe we don't need to ask the government's, permission to stop an invasion at our southern border. And
Well,
as you test those things, you start to get, I think, a little more independence.
yeah, you don't have to follow the rules if the law is on your side with regard to the left, right? They don't have to follow the rules because the law or the decision or the power, I guess, rather than the
Yeah,
law,
power is
this
the word. Yeah.
abstract, yeah, is on their side. What is the left? Have you gotten a real good like definition of it? Because I go from one, there's a social left and stuff, but I tend to think of it in aggregate as a unifying conformist principle around this ideal of progressivism, which is just constant refinement towards a certain goal, which appears degenerate in all of its affect, but appears virtuous in all of its, rhetoric. But what do you think of as the left?
I guess it depends on like what discipline under which we want to classify it. Like I think
Okay.
that's actually the problem. I always found
Mm,
Curtis Yarvin's definition of pronomian versus antinomian to be kind of the best way to understand the right is pro order and the left is kind of against it. But
mm,
I think an easier, I mean, you could go for the purely material understanding, like what is the left? Well, it's a coalition of groups that materially benefit from kind of dissolving the current order, right? They go ahead and farm out the what exists in the West, and they sell it off in blocks to client classes that support them for this and give them electoral and other benefits. Or you could look at it as kind of an ideological catharsis as they unwind the Christian core of the West and
mm.
thereby free themselves to explore all these things that define them. Or you could look at it as, well, a lot of people who find it difficult to conform to Western standards of behavior and social organization and benefit from like it really is, whichever angle you want to look at it, either way, it's about the deconstruction and who benefits from the deconstruction of
Okay.
kind of the current order that rules the West or did rule the West.
And this is the conundrum with the so-called right wanting to preserve order. And this is what you talk about time and again in all of your work, is that the right is trying to cling to an order that's a moving target. Like, how do you, like, I suppose that's where the place of Christianity comes in for you, or does it? Let me rephrase that as a question. How does order in a constantly shifting environment, how is that expressed? How is it rallied around, and how is it implemented?
So I think the right really draws its strength, as the left draws its strength from deconstruction, right? It can constantly ask questions, it can constantly pull apart, it can constantly seek to reorder. I think the right draws its strength from fundamental axioms, like truths that are built into society, natural hierarchies, things that are unarguable if you are, kind of taking them as the core of truth. I think that that's really where the right arises. The things that are undeniably true about particular cultures and ways of being and peoples and the way that they're going to order themselves is really where the right flourishes. And then, I think there's always a constant battle, because there are always people who benefit from that structure, and there are always people who benefit from deconstructing that structure. And so that's always the left-right tension, is the establishment of that order versus those that benefit from the deconstruction of it and the creation of a different type of structure. And so I think that the right's main problem at the moment is they don't share enough culture or enough kind of fundamental ground on which to actually recreate that position of strength. You have 20 different directions. The Christian nationalists can't imagine siding with the neo-pagans, who can't imagine siding with some of the post-liberals or the non-woke liberals, who can't imagine siding, and so you have all these different camps who oppose the revolution in some way because it's tearing at one part of the thing they cared about. Yeah. Many of those different groups also tore apart pieces of the order during their moment of the revolution, and now find themselves scared that that's passed them by. But that doesn't create a coalition, because everyone wants to turn back to their moment in time when their order was the one that reigned.
Is that true for you and your people, or your cultural phenotype? Like, there was a certain point, like this is the question, like at certain point, how far back in time do you have to go before you're on the left? 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 300, right?
This is kind of the comedy with Yarvin, right? It's like he goes all the way back and says, like, well, the American founders were radical leftists, and he's got a good point there. But there's, if you go far enough back, everyone is a leftist, right? Someone is always deconstructing and remaking society at some point. And so, I think the temptation is to lock everything into, like, again, this universal definable standard of when this thing started, or when the right and the left, as if right and left are themselves categories that should not be contingent on culture or time. When of course they have to be contingent on culture and time. And so I think that it's dangerous. We can look at these things and say to ourselves, there's a problem here, and we can trace the way that it impacted the thought and how we arrive at where we are now. And that's useful in the way that most history is, because it informs identities and it informs who we are and where we might go. But I don't know that it brings solutions, because ultimately we have to be who we are now. We have to figure out the core of who we are now and what our way of being will be going forward. And I don't think that maybe, all of those other times and places that are contingent on the elements, present in them necessarily will tell us exactly what we're going to be going forward. I think we can recognize the pattern in the cycle, but I don't think I don't think we can just go back to the 1950s or, the 1450s and suddenly re-inhabit that way of being.
There's a constant tension between the who you are, the particular of your who and your group, and those axiomatic principles that you were speaking of, like these ever-present or very deep-seated patterns of existence of human organization and desire and regulation. So it's easy to kind of forget to switch modes from, like, the eternal or the philosophical into the practical. And this is something I want to ask you about. It's like there's also this problem of technology. Technology constantly changes our relationship to one another, or does it? What do you think of the role of technology in the total state, as you call it, and in the dismantling or the reformation of the total state?
I think it creates the levels of abstraction that certainly put us where we are right now. The constant application of technique is what creates the managerial state. It creates the
Okay.
bureaucracies that we live in today are very far from being organic. They're all built on a large amount of artificial ideology and abstraction.
Yeah.
And so we talk about technology as if it's something that's relatively recent, like it happened when we started getting like solid state computers or something. But technology is, of course, extremely old, and it has always had an impact. The crossbow fundamentally changes the way that European civil order is created,
Yeah.
because it changes warfare and everything. The ability of a individual to enter into combat as opposed to a knight that requires large amounts of wealth and training and
Yeah.
a whole system to kind of be behind them, completely revolutionizes the feudal system. And even the Pope tried to ban the crossbow at some point because it was too revolutionary for the social order as it was. And so
And now
technology
he
is
won't let the
not
Latin Mass happen anymore. So look at where that
exactly.
got him.
Return to crossbow. But yeah, no, that's one of those things where we like to think that revolutionary technology is like something extremely modern, right? But it's not at all.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's also this illusion that progress will always solve our problems. So at the same time, as we're arguing over whether the crossbow should be an issue, Machiavelli was writing, in his discourses, that a lot of people thought that artillery would kind of make soldiers obsolete. You would never need soldiers anymore because you're going to have artillery, and that just kills everybody. And we've had that argument 1,000 times, right? Nukes and close air support,
Drones,
and
yeah.
missiles and drones. Eventually, but guess what? It turns out actually you always just need rough guys to kick in doors. And we in the U.S. military learned that in Afghanistan, right? Like, no matter how advanced your planes get, no matter how insane your technology gets, a couple of goat herders who are just willing to go at it harder than you can actually still like win this thing. And so in some ways, I think technology is critical because it can create these really complex systems that remove us from organic interactions and isolate us from the things that make us human and change the way that we order society, and most importantly, enable large amounts of scale that again fundamentally change our interactions. But at the end of the day, we're actually just human beings, and we can't. I think the Tower of Babel always comes apart. I don't think we actually ever get to the abolition of man that C.S. Lewis predicted. I don't think we can actually abstract ourselves so radically that we stop being human beings. And I think once we get to that point, we start to see societies kind of fall apart, because once they have removed themselves so far from what they fundamentally started as, they can't hold themselves together anymore to prop up the vast technological advancements that they've created.
Well, at the risk of summoning Diogenes, public masturbator and pooper of dogs or whatever he is, what is a man then? Like, what's the fundamental building block for you in your outlook?
I think that we are, social animals. I think that we are political animals. I think that we are people who are defined by our duties and reliance in our cultures. And I think that that's the main problem that we've had, is as we've abstracted our existence, as we've isolated ourselves and pulled ourselves out of kind of the natural bonds of community that would have defined us as human beings, we felt less and less like humans. We felt less and less real. We have algorithms and all these different things that teach us to think like a computer, like something incredibly unnatural. We enter into the hyperreality that is so far removed from the things that it was originally based on, that we're kind of through the looking glass as human beings. But I think if you want to understand what a human is, you really have to put them back in the context of all those things that birth their society, that, the family, the tribe, the church. These are the things that imprint on us from a young age as to who we are and what we're going to be. And I don't think that we can remove ourselves from those bonds and those concentric circles of support and still expect to see humans function in the correct way.
Hmm. What have been your particular temptations towards hyperreality since starting your? Well, I know you started a YouTube channel and then you started a Twitter, and your Twitter blew up in your face, and now you're just like
Yeah.
everywhere. What have been like the kind of the things that you've had to grow about, and then the illusions that have been presented to you that you've had to see through?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's constantly this desire to live online, right? That's where the real world is. That's where the real
Mm.
action is, particularly for me because I was, I've never lived in Washington, D.C. or New York. I've never even been, to this day, I don't work at the mothership of the Blaze. Like I'm not in the middle of where things are happening, right?
Mm.
So there's this illusion that like somewhere online, that's where the real world happens. That's where real power is. That's where your community or your colleagues or other things are, and that's somehow separate from your life. And so there's definitely a temptation to pull away from your things that really matter, your things you should really be spending your time on, the things that are far closer to you. I mean, by raw power influence, obviously, like there's way more going on Twitter or YouTube than right next to you.
Mm.
But the things that are next to you are the things that make you human and are actually connecting you to your community and who you are. And ultimately, if you die tomorrow, none of the people online would actually give a crap. And the only people who are going to care about it really are the
Mm.
people next to you that you're ignoring while you're trying to plug into that hyper reality. So
Mm.
I think there's a constant need to make sure that you can, you know, ground yourself in the real rather than fall into the temptation of constantly living in an abstract space where you think power and influence and other important things lie, but really is largely illusion.
That brings up the topic of campus protests. I got my start on this business by chronicling the meltdown at the Evergreen State College 7 years ago, and going through and constructing the documentary, just the fundamental, first, the primary document. And me and my wife are now watching it because she's never seen it. We're going through the whole protest and how the teachers put it into motion, and like how everybody behaves. It's just like this glorious cringe fest. It's just off the charts cringe fest. But that happened. It was really like it happened. I was going to the college. It happened right in front of me. I watched it. I wanted to make sense of it because people were just turning it into memes. But then 2020 rolls around. Same thing happens worldwide. Now they're doing it again. To what extent it is as powerful as previous iterations is to be determined yet. But I sense a sort of marginal amount of admiration for the students, because they are kind of getting offline. They are kind of getting into the tents and doing their dance parties in their little bubble. What do you think about that as what they're trying to accomplish? As what's going on there? To what degree is that important or real or touch the real or can influence the real?
So in one way, obviously, like participating in a real space next to actual people, being in community, having a shared goal and understanding of something seems more real, right? It's happening actually in the world. But at the same time, the things animating them are entirely abstract and entirely removed from their actual lives.
Hmm.
No one in these protests is probably actually directly impacted by whatever's happening in Gaza. I mean, maybe some of the immigrants who have families there, but in general, most of the people involved only care because it's been piped into their phones or into their TV sets or whatever. And
Hmm.
most of the opinions that they have on the event are all fifth hand. They're more inhabited by kind of, I don't want to say, well, I mean, yeah, demons is the right word. They're inhabited by patterns of being that are not their own. They're animated entirely by ideas and events that have no
Hmm.
grounding in who they were or what they grew up in, and what they're actually going to do with their lives. It's all really just a celebration or a shared act of almost religious fervor around something that has no real connection to anything in your life. And so in that way, it's fake and it's gay. And so I guess the problem that you run into is like there is a real value in taking actual action to being in community and working together, in real life. But when everything you're doing is just furthering the agenda of basically algorithms or spirits, how whatever helps you understand the concept, whenever what you're doing is just furthering these kind of modes that are completely unconnected to you and
Hmm.
are, that you don't own or understand in any real way, then it's completely artificial, and I don't think it really serves any good purpose.
Does would you then go to say that the that counter protest that kind of went a little viral with the the frat boys standing up, guarding the flag, hooting and hollering, getting together with the American flag, is are they a little bit closer to the real, or is that still just a show?
So it's closer to the real in that basically these guys are like on a campus and they just see a lot of people that they don't like. I don't think they're ideological in any way, right? Like I don't think they probably know much about the conflict or care deeply about it in one direction or the other. And in some sense, they just see their home being attacked, right? They just see a place that they care about, and there's people here who don't seem to care about it or who hate it. And they understand that, they should be defending some idea of kind of their home and this kind of thing. But again, I think all of that is still marred in large amounts because it's so abstract and not really centered on the thing they're interjecting themselves into is fake, and so they just become the enemy of a bunch of fakeness,
Hmm.
which is not really to decry anything that they're doing. Like their reaction is probably just, hey, don't take down the American flag and put up a Palestinian flag. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to object to. That's a kind of a gut check. This is my home, and you're taking something down that represents my home and putting up something that obviously doesn't, and I don't like that. But in some ways, I think that just gets used for the purposes of kind of these two sides and their propaganda, though that has nothing to do with the right or wrong of the frat boy protester.
Yeah. Do you think that is it enough to just call things fake and gay and retarded and cringe? And that opens the question of what about conservative or right word art and the creation of culture? Because it's widely assumed and generally applicable up until wokeness kind of dominated everything, made everything really, really bad, that people who are really creative tend to need to mess around with lines, play around, concoct, alchemize culture and stuff like that. And so, what about the right's move toward culture, towards vision, towards something that is vital? And how is that in your watching what's happening in the culture war? Do you see paths of promise, possibility, and power through art that is aligned with your values, the rights
I
values?
think so. I mean, the old, the kind of the old understanding is that conservatives are really bad at art and culture, and liberals are good at it, and that was true at some point. But I think we're quickly reaching the, kind of the switching point where everything that the left is making is just horribly
Yeah,
boring and cheesy and
yeah.
staunch, and it doesn't have any interesting aspects to it. And the right is still learning this. It's still trying to find its legs. It's certainly not breaking through with game changing art in some ways, but I think it's definitely gaining in this area because if only because by subtraction, like just the left is losing this ability faster than the right is gaining it, perhaps. But the right, I think, is still gaining it. And I think vitalism is a key part of this. Many people assume that the right has to be, the guy from Footloose, right? They have to be like John Lithgow yelling at people, and that
Oh,
it's
not Kevin
impossible for
Bacon.
them.
Not Kevin
Not, yeah,
Bacon.
no, it's
No.
they're probably not. They would not be the normal representation of the right in that movie. But yeah, no, most people think that that's the only version of the right that can exist, but obviously that's not the case. There have been amazing works of art created by what would be considered very traditional cultures. There have been amazing and stunning things that captivate the mind that have been created. I mean, the Hagia Sophia is something that literally is said to have converted barbarians the minute they walked into Christianity simply by observing its beauty. I don't
Mm.
think anyone's going to call the Byzantine Empire super woke. So I think that it's entirely possible that conservatives that there's a vital version of right wing art and beauty that brings people together and builds society and makes something of substance, without having to necessarily become like degenerate and have to like push, the destruction of your civilization. People seem to like make that, deconstruction is the only form of valuable art that exists, is often like a thing you hear, and that's why the conservatives can't do it, the right can't do it. But I
Yeah.
don't think that's correct, and I think an observation of art through history kind of shows that's not.
Well, what about again? How far back do you go before you start wanting to be a little bit left with regard to, let's just say, the founder of Christianity, Jesus Christ? Was he not revolutionary, or do we want to like? Was Paul the real revolutionary to make it to Gentilize Christianity? Which step was too far? And because it does seem like Christianity has a revolutionary power to it. And I'm wondering if that is, or echoes of that are what caused the West to be in the state that it is now. Do you have any truck with that argument?
Well, again, I guess it depends on what we call the West. I think everybody who there's a very long and probably interesting but somewhat probably too pigeonholing of a argument to go about whether or not like the Rome all the way to the United States in 2024 is some kind of continuous Western civilization. Oswald Spengler said absolutely not. Actually,
Hmm.
that none of these cultures are actually the same culture. There is no continuity in the sense that that you just go all the way from the ancient Greeks up to whatever the Treaty of Westphalia and continue until the current United States. Like that's not actually how civilizations work, and so I don't know if you can just make this continuous line that way. But it's hard to argue that Christianity isn't revolutionary in some way, but of course it's a revolution against what, right? As
Yeah.
Christians, we believe that Christ is the fulfillment of God's promise. So I guess you could say it's revolutionary in the sense that it's fighting against a pagan civilization, or it's revolutionary in the sense that it's the upending of kind of a particular Jewish understanding up to that point. But ultimately, the Christian doctrine is not the idea of permanent revolution. It's the idea of Christ's fulfillment of the law. And so I think it's a failure to understand Christianity as simply this revolutionary force, because I don't think that's really the case.
Yeah. Is there a solution here in Christianity to our ills, or at least a foundation from which we can build, or from which you would wish to build society? And what is that? You say Christ is the fulfillment of the law. Is that just in the context of Jewish law, or is that in a more deeper, profound sense of the ordering of society?
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Um, I'll say this. Maybe this is the best way to approach this. Um, some people will look at society or the West or something and say, well, this is the problem that I want to solve, and so I'm looking for the ideology or the religion or whatever to kind of paste over that or apply to that will kind of fix this problem for me. For me, C.S. Lewis said Christianity is like the sun. It's the thing that allows me to see everything else. It's by its light that I understand the other things that I interact with. Christianity, the Christianity is not a tool to solve the West.
Okay.
Christianity is the point. Christianity is the West is Christendom. And so asking, can Christianity save the West is like saying, can Christ save Christianity? The answer is, of course.
Okay.
Is it the thing on which you have to build? Absolutely. You can build something else. You can build other civilizations. Other civilizations can and will and do exist, but they won't be the West. They won't be Christendom. They won't have a continuity of who we are, what we are, by stripping that away. And so that doesn't mean that there isn't a fundamental kind of it doesn't mean we don't have to look again at how we apply Christianity or how we understand ourselves in its light, but there is no separation of Christianity from this problem, because it is the only thing, it is the through line that is defining the very thing we're claiming to want to save in the first place.
And what is the quality or the content of this this thing through the light of Christianity? Like what is it that we're working on or living in, perpetuating?
Sorry, you'll have to give maybe a little more
I mean,
clarification
I
on that
like
one.
I really respect your answer, but I just want the content. Like, how does Christianity help you see the total state? How does Christianity help you see the powers and the principalities and then separate them from reality? Like, how is it? And I don't know if you're a Christian nationalist or if that is even a coherent concept to you, but I just want the content of what you believe and how that informs the declarations that you're making and then the path forward that you want to make. So I don't know the specific question. I just want like the flavor of how Christianity or your worship of Jesus Christ animates, gives light, brings light, gives you guidance on what to do, what not to do.
Sure. So, I mean, in a very personal sense, it gives me it gives me a lot of guidance on how I should behave and how I should order my life, the kind of person I should be to my wife, to my family, to the people around me, the kind of community that's desirable, what the common good is, and how we should work to achieve it, and what the limits of a government or other actors would and should be when they're undertaking the project of creating a society that has the virtues that are reflected in Christianity, or rather are reflections of Christianity. And that of course allows us to understand, I think, the inhuman abstractions of the total state when we see that the society that has been created for us by large bureaucratic organizations no longer values those personal interactions, when we see the desire to quantify things that are fundamentally immaterial and cannot be placed into a managerial system, and the desire to erode all of the particularities in culture and ways of being so that we can order people into these large structures rather than and have them serve those structures rather than figure out how those structures can best serve the needs of the community and the people. I think that it helps us to understand that. I mean, I think there's a danger in saying that there's this Christ, how do I say this?
Christ
Um,
consciousness.
what's the no, there's a I think it's a King of the Hill joke, right? It's like you're not making rock better, you're making or
Yeah.
Christian rock isn't making rock better, it's just making Christianity worse. There's a temptation to like create a like kitschy Christ stamped version of everything and say that's how you make things Christian. And so I think that's dangerous. Like I think politics and power and all these things continue to exist in a fallen world, and there's a correct application of a Christian understanding and a way of being that makes those things better. But I do think there's a danger in just like giving this artificial plastic forced stamp onto those things and saying, well, this is the Christian structure that makes that thing work.
Yeah.
I think a lot of those things are emergent from Christian people. I think that people who are Christian will come about at it in a certain way. And to be clear, I think that kind of Western peoples, of course, have their own version of this. One of the things about Christianity is, while it's universally true, it applies itself to particularities. So, the church in Russia looks different from the church in Egypt, which looks different from the church in the United States. And so the manifestation of Christianity doesn't override everything about the way of being of the people. But at the same time, I also don't think you can just take Christianity and like use it to patch the holes in like your ideal social project.
Yeah.
There's a just frankly mystical connection between these things that doesn't get mapped on to like a system flow of power, that kind of.
Yeah. But do you advocate either publicly or privately for, I guess, Christianity or I guess Christian people? That's what you're making that distinction. There's like the Christian state would be just Christian people or people who are Christians doing the business of the state or social order or whatever. How do you
Right.
promulgate that, or to what degree is promulgating Christianity a central focus or an explicit focus of your work?
I think it's critical. So I guess I'll put it this way. A lot of people are pushing like the idea of Christian nationalism, and I
Yeah.
don't disagree with many of the kind of goals of some Christian nationalism is a fuzzy concept, and there is no real central thing, and so you can't be like, here are the 10 points of Christian nationalism and the ones I agree with and disagree with. But for the most part, like I don't hear, hey, we want the law to reflect the values of the Bible, these kind of things. Like that doesn't bother me. That's not a problem. That's fine. Those are all good. My problem is with Christian nationalism as like a banner is it's obviously a rhetorical trap from the left. Like that's very clearly the reason that the media pushed that at the time they did. They very clearly want to make that about white nationalism. That's the reason that they sub that in the way they did. And also, I think that the phrase, in some ways, is a problem because it strips out the content of Christianity and replaces it with some kind of cheap ideological political project. It's kind of the idea that just like conservatism or free market capitalism or whatever, there's like a set of ideological things that we hold to, and this is our political, like we're neocons, and so we want to peace through strength and free trade and borders don't really matter, blah blah blah, and this is what makes us. This is our political project. As where I don't think that's what Christianity is. It's a central feature of a people who are trying to it's a central feature of a people who are trying to order their society, but it is not the entirety of their way of being, and it's more than just an ideological construct into like which to fit your political project. And so I don't like that. I don't like the framing for that reason, even though I wouldn't find myself in conflict with many of the goals of I guess your average Christian nationalist advocate. Do I think Christianity is important? Yeah, in like a really like you and me, it's important level, and I think it will better you, and I think it will better the people around you, and it'll better our community together. But is it central in the sense that I think it furthers my personal political ideology? I mean, no, I don't like that. I don't think that's the right use of it.
Not to get Sunday school, but how does it teach me to be a better person? How has it taught you to be a better person?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I would, I would say that Christianity is important in my life because it has changed the way that I approach other people. I see people as valuable because they are loved by God and they are created in God's image, and that encourages me to, and I'm sinful and fallen and I mess this up all the time. But more often, hopefully, every day, it encourages me to treat the people around me as if they matter and have value, and people that I should be serving and thinking about and acting on behalf of. People who I'm motivated to go the extra mile and do more and ignore things that maybe I would immediately want or desire or would benefit from, because ultimately the people around me are worth it and valuable. And it's personally gotten me through critical, difficult times in my life. I quite literally would not be here if it had not been for, Christ giving me meaning and guidance and comfort in times of great sorrow. And so, Christianity was a very academic thing for me for a long time. I felt like I was a very rational person. I grew up in the church. I always had faith. I would never say I wasn't spiritual on some level, but with the death of my first wife, it was just something that I went from knowing and understanding in a very academic sense to absolutely having to understand in a very spiritual way.
Wow.
Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have made it.
Yeah. Wow. So you write this book and you put it out today. Do you understand what it is yet? Do you know what it is? Do you know what you've done? And I ask that because it usually leads to the next thing. It's like, okay, this got me somewhere, not professionally, but intellectually, like in your own growth and your own critique or your own work. Do you know what it is? Do you know where you're headed? from her?
No, mainly because I didn't know what I was doing in the first place. It's weird. I know like this probably sounds like some really dumb abstract thing, but like I didn't write this book. Like
Yeah.
I was doing book reports on a bunch of stuff I was trying to understand.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
know, I ran into a problem in 2020. Politics in the world did not make sense. I needed to figure it out. I started reading a bunch of books that I didn't really get, and the way to get them for me, because I'm kind of a teacher, is to teach them to someone, to
Yeah.
go through the process of writing down what I've learned and how I understand it. And as I did that, even though I didn't really have any intention of this being the case, the pieces just kind of started to fit together. I recognized that the different books that I were reading had a through line, that there was a understanding of how power worked and what governments were and constitutions were, and how the structure of our society had changed post kind of the Industrial Revolution, and how managerialism and globalism had changed the ordering of society. And that was not my intention, and it's
Yeah.
not what I meant to do, and it just kind of came together on its own. And so I know that the book is basically kind of my journey and the explanation of it, but I absolutely have no clue where it goes now, because I didn't start with the destination in mind in the first place.
Yeah, it brings to mind this old saying from my culture that God rarely moves us when we're standing still. So if you're just moving and going and doing, then something's going to happen of its own accord. It seems like you just kind of put yourself in the path of creation. So Total State, it's available wherever books are sold. Is it going to be turned into a movie?
Yeah, working on those rights, see if I can. Amazon's gonna make it woke though. It'll terrible. They'll
Oh,
ruin.
they can't. This is unwokeable. Have you not made something unwokeable?
A lot of diversity casting. They'll trans up some of the Vilfredo Pareto, but with a bunch of eyeliner and pink shocks through whatever.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, are you going to turn it into a lecture series, or it's just a part of your lecture series that's already there? I mean, it's an opportunity for you to kind of more formalize your work, right?
Yeah, that's really what it was. Is the formalization of a lot of things that I had learned and understand, and really, like I said, it was the adding the connective tissue. These are all the book reports. These are all kind of the things the pieces that I had sitting on the work table, but I had never put them together in a way that made them fit and made it continuous. And so it's really just my opportunity to organize these disparate pieces and thoughts and things into one continuous thing that hopefully does a lot of explaining as to kind of how we got where we are, and maybe where we can go.
Is there any particularly dangerous idea, and if so, dangerous to what, that you've stumbled upon in this research that even you were a little bit, whoa, I don't even know if I want to go here?
Yeah, there are several. The dangerous idea is that I do think there's a limit to human organization, and that means that we simply can't keep going the direction we're going. We will not live in the society we have now forever. It will probably come apart, and it will not come apart in a pleasant way, because the way of being that we have created is just unsustainable for humans. And that's a scary thing for sure. It's a lot of people on the right don't want to hear that, because it's all about getting back to 1776 or whatever. But that's not happening either. The only way out is through, and that's something that we probably are uncomfortable with. It also means taking on a lot of responsibility. We have farmed out a large amount of who we are and what makes us human to the total state. Yeah, we've had a lot of things of value stripped away, but we also don't have to educate our kids or take care of our ailing parents or do a lot of the heavy lifting that dominated our free time and our all of our other things that once made us a society. And if we're ever going to escape this, we have to kind of take those things back upon ourselves. We have to return ourselves to a life of social restriction and communal duty and things that people discarded for a reason, because it allowed them to do a lot of the things that we enjoy doing today. And none of that is fun, and none of that is a popular sell, but it's all, I think, very true.
What's the funnest activity that you're loath to give up at the end of the world?
I really like board games with friends.
Really?
I don't know that that has to go, but yeah, I really and I'm a huge fan of overly complex German board games.
Really? Me too.
Um, oh yeah, no, don't make me turn the camera to the wall of board games I
Oh,
have right
could
next to
you?
me right
You don't want to? Okay, I don't want you to like actually, but I'm really excited. I was hoping you'd be into board games. But we should
Yeah, I
wrap up
know.
the call. But what's your favorite top five, top three?
The best one I've ever played is probably the Battlestar Galactica board game, which is super obscure and you can't get anymore. It's like
Okay.
it's out of print.
Is that the one where
But
you're trying to figure out who the bot
yeah, it's like
is? Okay.
it's a really complicated game of werewolf. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the more mafia. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's one of my favorite of all time. I really enjoy the deck building games. And then like Power Grid is probably my favorite like German resource
Really?
management
Yeah.
game. So yeah.
Yeah. I
And
just
then of
got
course I
what?
was used to be a big Warhammer player when I had time. There has been a lot of
Yeah.
time.
You and Dave should have just a Warhammer stream at some point. Dave Green.
Yeah, we've talked about that several times. Me, him, and Morgoth were gonna do one at some point, but we've never pulled it
Yeah,
together.
there's some deep kind of theology that Dave keeps on like pointing to with the whole Warhammer universe that's kind of like scary but kind of cool. Like, Dave's the master of that, like really
He
ominous
is.
truth kind of stuff. Yeah. Aaron, thank you very much for your taking time out of your very, very busy day to talk about this. You work for the Blaze or with the Blaze. Your book, The Total State, is available. I'll put the links down below. Are there any political projects, small communal projects that you think have particular promise that people can plug themselves into? Or is it just going to say, are you just going to say, go to church, which is
I
fine.
mean, that's great advice, but if you're looking for other things outside of that, I will be speaking at the Old Glory Club conference in June, and they're an organization that is trying to revive kind of the fraternal order in kind of the Moose Lodge
Oh yeah, Masons.
sense.
You guys are
Yeah,
like
that
Freemasons 2.0.
but without the cult. Yeah, and, trying to return to it's
I
giving
don't
me the
believe
look
you.
like you'll definitely be worshiping, sacrificing to something. But it's an organization that's trying to create, that level of doing things for the community, finding like-minded people, creating a social kind of self-help situation, or rather a communal help situation,
Yeah.
social safety net for people that's not plugged into the total state, the government, the things that
Is
want to
that
cancel
is
you.
that distributed? That's national, or like their little
Yeah.
pockets kind of stuff going on?
Yeah. They've got a central organization, but each chapter is its own thing. They operate, independently, and so
Oh,
your
fun.
chapter is your own thing. You only need a certain number of people to get it together and get it off the ground, and then you can help out your community, meet like-minded guys, and do all that basket weaving, building that we
Oh,
keep saying we
cool.
should be doing.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Great. Your work is just fabulous, and it's been an honor to know you the last couple of years and get to interact with you and have like different conversations and stuff. So it's great to just see you prospering with your project. So kudos to you.
Well, thanks, man. No, I always love talking to you. We always have a good time. Always have a thoughtful time. So I appreciate it.
And do you have your own metal album, or you're just a pure consumer for your workouts? Because every day you post a good morning with a creepy photo of your some sort of
Whatever, death metal or something that's happening. Yeah, on that thing. No, I played several instruments badly. But you
yeah,
should just know at some point, I'm getting old enough to where it's like there's a limited amount of time,
yeah,
and I'm just never gonna be like an all-star musician. It's
yeah,
okay to just be good at what I'm good at, and then appreciate other people who are good at what they do.
yeah, yeah. Humility. It's a rare practice today to be a little humble where we can.
Well, I feel like I should start, do like the Bruce Willis thing where you just start a band once you get famous enough, or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
all the different
Russell Crowe. Yeah,
actors.
yeah.
Yeah,
Keanu
exactly.
Reeves. Yeah, Ethan
Exactly.
Hawke.
Yeah,
They all did it. You
sure.
got the facial hair. It's right there. Do some dad parties, with your dad bod and your dad jams. You're all good.
Exactly. Yeah,
Make the kids cringe while you call them fake and gay. Best
absolutely.
best of both worlds. Thank you very much, Aaron. I'm going to end the recording now. All right, man. We're done recording.